into it. And I think that things have changed incredibly in my lifetime and not enough. But one of the most important facets of adoption is the yearning to know more about what happened from the perspective of the birth parents or the adoptive parents, and what happened from the perspective of the adoptee. So we are very lucky to have two great panelists. Patricia Martinez Dorner has been working in this field almost as long as, she's much younger than me, but almost as long.
No, I'm older than you.
Cara Foley is amazing advocate and worker in this world of adoption. And I thought we're going to jump right in. When you start, just say a little bit about yourself. One more thing about me in terms of search and reunion, I found my birth family over 50 years ago, and I have Sunday dinner every week with many of them. So it's been an interesting process, and it takes a lot of years to normalize. So I will just leave that there, and I'll jump in here and there with questions and comments from our panel. I thought we'd start off with Cara. Cara's going to talk a little bit about, she's going to tell you who she is, and then talk a little bit about her own experience.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name's Cara Foley. I am an adult adoptee. I was born and adopted in the state of Rhode Island many years ago. I won't say how long. Over the course of my life, I had a lot of support from my adoptive parents because I asked a lot of questions about my bio family. Many of those questions weren't able to be answered, unfortunately, because I had a closed adoption. And so I developed a natural curiosity to learn about myself and my biological roots. And I became involved in searching for my biological family basically when I turned 18. And fast forward a few years, got involved in some legislative advocacy around adult adoptee rights, more specifically the legislation that passed in 2011, which allows adult adoptees age 25 and older to access a non-certified copy of their original birth certificate. So that legislation passed in 2011, and shortly thereafter, I reunited with my birth family. So there was about a 1-year implementation period. And after that time, there was a media event to announce the release of original birth certificates to adult adoptees who had applied throughout that year. And I was fortunate enough to receive my original birth certificate from Governor Chafee. And the best part about it was that many of my biological family members and members of my adoptive family were in the audience. So it was a very unique experience to be able to say, oh, the birth certificate matches, and here you are right in front of me. I work in child welfare, and I continue to do adult adoptee rights advocacy work, and I'm really excited to be here today. So looking forward to talking with you.
Cara, would you tell us a little bit about how you went about your search? Did you have some help along the way? Did you just go and do it all by yourself? Were you pre-social media, you know?
Yeah, so I started searching when I was around 18, and I was doing it by myself for a while. I didn't have a ton of information to go off of because, like I mentioned earlier, my adoption was closed. So identifying information about my birth family was not provided to myself or to my parents. So I had about a 1 1/4 page character description, if you will, of my birth mom and some of her siblings and grandparents, that sort of thing. So I worked from that and did my best on my own, but then I enlisted the help of a close friend of mine, Lee, who is an adoptee herself, and she is a search angel, and she helped guide me along the process of searching. Over the course of several years, I was able to request additional information from the agency I was adopted through, Children's Friend. They had adjusted some of their non-identifying information, I think like internal policies. And so they were able to provide me with more information, still nothing identifying, but just more information from my file specifically. And so from that, I was able to look through the legal notices from the time that I was adopted, around the time that my adoption would have been legalized. And I was able to find my birth last name. So I had my first and middle name. I knew them my whole life, Megan Elizabeth. And I was able to find my birth last name in the legal notices. So then I went from there, and with the help of Lee, thought I got pretty close and came across my birth mom's name, and the numbers I called weren't in service. So I had joined several search websites online. I think it was Adoptee Connect specifically. And so I posted the information that I had, and ironically, I was contacted by one of my half siblings shortly before my 27th birthday. And she reached out to me because she had been searching for me as well. And one thing led to another, and we met on September 10th, 2011. So 9/10/11, which, you know, we see as a magical number in our family. And the ironic part about it, you mentioned social media, is that when I found my birth last name, I took to Facebook, of course, and started searching anyone related to that last name, trying to find anyone that maybe I looked like or anything of that sort. And I couldn't find anything. So when I reunited and found out my birth mother's name was the name that had in fact come up in my research, I then looked on Facebook, and she had joined Facebook about a month after I had checked. So we just missed each other, basically. And so when I found her Facebook page, there was a person in the photos that looked nearly identical to me. I thought it was me in the photos. And I was like, how does this person have photos of me? Like, where did this come from? And it turns out that I have a full biological sister. So we have the same parents. And I also have 5 half sisters, a half brother, many nieces and nephews and things like that. So yeah, so social media would have been more helpful had we connected at the same time. So.
Great, Kara. I have one last question, and we're
Sure.
going to run around. We'll be back to you,
Yeah.
but tell me, for the audience, in case they don't know, I'm sure many of them do, what a search angel is and how
Sure.
what that person does for you.
Yeah. So search angels are individuals often who have lived experience with adoption themselves on any part of the adoption triad. So an adoptee or a birth parent or adoptive parent. And they, in my experience, many of them have conducted their own searches to find and reunite with their birth families, whether it be a full reunion or just to gather information. Every adoptee is different in terms of what their interest in connection is or isn't with biological families. So search angels are people who, in my experience, don't charge a fee necessarily to help support people like myself who are searching for a biological family. And often they have quite a toolkit of strategies, websites, books, etc., to help support you in your search. And they're able to really essentially act as a mentor and or a primary searcher if you are seeking to connect with your birth family.
Great, thank you.
You're
So
welcome.
Patricia Martinez Dorner, I'd love to have you just say a little bit about who you are. I'm sure everyone knows, but there may be a couple of people that need a little in-service training on your wonderfulness. You have been working in this field for many years, and you have an inordinate amount of expertise. So if you could say whatever you like, Patricia, but do add something about the advent of DNA and the advent of social media, because you've been doing this before, during, and after all of those things.
Thank you, Joyce. First of all, I entered the world of adoption as a prospective adoptive parent who expected my child to jump out of the sky into my arms. I knew nothing. I had no understanding of adoption and was very fortunate that we as a family approached an agency that became a leader in the educational process of adoption, as well as the practice of adoption towards open adoption, where families know each other as family, blended family, adoptive and birth families. So that was the initial experience. Shortly after I entered parenting by adoption, the agency began and continued to grow the practice towards a fully open adoption where people would know one another. I was invited to take on a post-adoption program, which was one of the very first in the country, along with you, Joyce, who'd already been doing it, whereby the idea was that I would be educating people in the community about adoption, but also supporting families by adoption. What I found was that very quickly, I became approached by people who wished to seek out original family through the search process. And magically, I got linked in with all the advocates that were clamoring for change in adoption and had the tools and the knowledge for searching. So the people who were helping me learn how to search were many of the voices from within the adoption movement, which was quite an amazing joining of forces, if you will. So my experience grew to include the search process very dramatically, and also the advocacy for change in the practice of adoption. As a result, I eventually went into private practice, continuing all the things I had been doing, which included the helping people to connect in open adoptions if that was their desire, and to help people search. So I contracted with agencies, I became a court-appointed intermediary, and feeling that people have a right to self-determination. If people didn't wish to work with me, I would guide them to the search groups and any other resources that were available. With the advent of DNA, which really pleased me greatly, I decided that I could go into partial retirement because people were now creating their own realities and having that right to self-determination. The only concern that I have had really regarding the pursuit of DNA knowledge, which has been wonderful, is that a lot of people plunge into contact with birth relatives in ways that sometimes can be problematic. And I advocate for preparation, and it doesn't have to be with a professional. It can be through the reading of books, joining groups that support people, and so on. But the complexity of the connection process is so mammoth that I really encourage people to become as self-aware and aware of the issues for all parties, because it's really important that we do understand these issues in order to navigate them most successfully. In my personal journey, my children, who are now full adults in their 40s, have had open adoptions with varying degrees of expression. And it has been really a wondrous journey that I am very grateful that we have been part of that as well and can speak directly about it. And so those are some of the things that I've been involved with. I also want to mention that as I continued my advocacy for open adoption when an adoption would happen, that I got very involved in the foster care process as well, helping people separated by foster care to reconnect as an area of very important advocacy, and trying to help people understand how to walk through that process as well, and being, of course, directly involved in facilitating those contacts. Joyce.
Well, thank you, Patricia. You know what I was thinking of while you were talking is that there's a lot of controversy still, it used to be much heavier, about who should initiate a search. And I'm wondering what you would have to say about that.
In my experience, the way that I have always framed it is that it's an invitation to participate in knowing one another. So I have always represented whatever party came to me. If a birth parent came to me, then I represented that birth parent in that manner. And I would speak about the issues for that person and the issues that would arise for the others that we were reaching out to in like fashion, because there's a lot of fear in all of this. People have so many issues of fear and concern about overstepping, about not being accepted, about whatever the feelings are of the person being sought. But when we frame it from the standpoint as we're extending a gift for that person to know us and for us to know one another. In working with minors, which I have worked with minors with you as well, through the years. It can be initiated by the adoptive parents. It can be initiated by the birth parents. I just feel that it's important to give people a place of importance because everybody counts. It has always troubled me when I hear that there are agencies that actually offer services for search, but won't do it on behalf of birth parents. I find that appalling. We must give all parties, including birth fathers, a voice in all of this, recognizing that sometimes we're not certain of the birth father until we do DNA. That's a reality. But they too need to be honored and respected and given a very important place. Joyce.
Kara, I'm wondering if you could say a little more. You initiated your search, but then you had a sister who sort of found you on DNA. Can you say something about the differences in those situations and, you know, how that all worked out in each situation?
Sure. So I had initiated my search because I'm a very curious person by nature. And I, even though I've been told I have similar features to my parents, I feel like I look very different from them. And their respective families, they look very, they look like they belong to their family. So that was something that I was searching for because from my perspective, I hadn't ever seen anyone that looked like me. And I was interested to see, you know, where I get my blue eyes from, or, you know, where I get my, I don't know, ears from, et cetera. So I began searching for that reason. And not every adoptee has the same kind of desire to search in that way. Everybody has a different goal, and some don't have a goal of searching at all. So it's a very unique experience. From the perspective of my sibling who had been searching for me, she is an older sibling to me. And so at the time that my birth mom was pregnant, she knew that. She was around her, even though she's a half sibling by my birth father. She was around my birth mother and knew that she was pregnant. And she had 4 other sisters. So she knew what happened when a woman is pregnant. A baby comes eventually. But a baby didn't come in that case. And so she felt very confused by that, I would imagine, and always had some curiosity around where I ended up, if I was okay, if I was safe. And so she shared with me that she had searched in a variety of different ways over the years. And the website that I had shared my information with was purely just like factual information that I had gathered over the course of my own search. So my first and middle and last name, birth, I shared that. And so she happened to, you know, click on the right website. You know, at the time she said that she wasn't very tech savvy, but she had done a quick search, I guess, for like adoption reunion related searches, and clicked on the right website, happened to see my information and connected with it because she knew some of the information that was included in the post and reached out. So it was a very, I never imagined that I would be in the position for someone to contact me. Like I had never actually thought about that being a possibility. And like Patricia had mentioned, I was very like almost hyper aware of how to make contact and the best way to do that. And actually I had a plan in place for how to do that. And then that went out the window, of course, when I was contacted. And then I panicked a little bit and I was like, what do I do? So it was a very unique sort of turn of events for me. And with Lee's support, I had to sort of like quickly figure out how to respond. And ironically, Lee was adopted, I think 45 years ago today. So it's a special day for her. So I feel like I need to give her a little shout out. But yeah, so it was a very interesting and unique experience. And I really identify a lot with what Patricia had said too about the connections are very complicated at times. Some are very easy and others are very challenging. And so reunion is a very, it's an ever-changing sort of experience. You know, relationships change over time. Life events happen. Something that I never imagined, like even really thought about going into reunion was that eventually you lose people too, and like what a toll that can take on you as an adoptee. So I basically have three families. I have my birth father's family, my birth mother's family, and then my adoptive family. And so when loss is experienced, it's like a very different spin on reunion that I hadn't ever considered. And, you know, I thought I was well prepared, but you can't be prepared for everything. So
Right.
interesting experience.
I wanted to say that I think it's really important for people to separate search and reunion. And I think that anyone in the world has the right to search. Many people who have nothing to do with adoption search at a certain point in their life. They want to know about their ancestors and they search. So search is something that's available to everyone. It's, you know, you'll find things, it'll be interesting to you, it'll give you information, but reunion is different. It requires that people choose to be in reunion. And it can sometimes bring heartache because one party may be wanting a relationship and the other party may not. And I'm sure that you see this too, Patricia and Kara, that many people dive into the search and the reunion and expect on some level to have it just be beautiful. And not everyone's life on the other side, whether it's the birth family or the adoptive family or the adoptee, has had it that easy. And the person searching is always aware of what they're doing, as Kara said, but the person found is often taken aback and needs a little more space and time. Sometimes if people step back, the person who came forward feels like they're being dissed and they're hurt and they step back. And reunions don't happen because of that sometimes. I'm wondering, Patricia, you have a lot of experience with this. Do you have some comment about this?
Well, I find that in the preparation process, it's so critical to examine the issues for the person who's seeking the other party, as well as to offer preparation to the people who are found and support, because so many feelings evolve. So much of what I discovered was what I call the flashback process and the recycling, the developmental recycling, where people have so much flashback to the time period when the birth and adoption occurred and the grief that walks along with that, the intensity that walks along with that, that sometimes stops them from progressing in the building of relationship because they have so much to process. In like fashion, the person seeking original family often begins to encounter emotions that were not anticipated. Just like you say, all they imagined was the great joy. And then they are shocked by the anxiety that develops, the grief for the lost years, the struggle with what titles to use for the people that come into their lives. When it's an adopted person, the struggles about whether or not to tell their parents. There's so many issues that arise, and my guidance tends to be take time to begin the healing process. For me, this experience is all about the healing potential. I can make no promises to anyone about outcomes, but the healing potential that can happen over time. And the more that we understand each other's issues, the better we will be able to manage them. The developmental recycling is a complex experience because for the birth parents is going back to that time period when the birth and adoption was to be occurring and occurred. For the adopted person, it can go all the way to the points in time before birth even. The recycling of all kinds of ages and stages. I had many years ago a birth mother and her daughter in relationship that had been growing. And in touching base with the birth mother, she said, my daughter is about 4 years old now, which meant that they were evolving in their relationship, and her daughter had now recycled through the infant stage and was at that toddler age. Sometime later, I talked with the adopted woman who was well into her 30s or early 40s, And now she was doing the individuation thing. She was a teenager and she didn't want the oversight of her birth mother telling her what to do or how to do it. And so seeing that up close is quite dramatic. But for people that are living it, it's really important for them to really understand these complexities that walk along with them, the developmental cycles, as well as the relationship stages that are so typical, and they're not linear. They can go back and forth in many ways. And so the more that we help people prepare, the more that we're there to support them over time. I've been doing this work since 1981. And so I have people that check in with me over the years and either want to do a session or just want to share what's happening. It's very, very enriching, if you will, to know how people have walked through this journey and how they have strengthened. Because for me, that strengthening that happens allows people who are adopted and birth parents and extended relatives to become increasingly grounded and strong, which our society benefits from. So it's quite a journey of self-discovery, but also for us to witness the potential healing that is so important for our entire society, Joyce.
I think that, you spoke about open adoption, Patricia, because you've had varying degrees of them in both of your children. And one of the things that I've noticed over the years, as have you and many others, is that open adoption is many different things. And so you have been one of the people who has helped to reopen vaguely open adoptions. For instance, the birth parents and adoptive parents met early on prior to the birth of the child. And then they exchanged pictures and letters and drifted off. There's a time when it becomes necessary. It may be the child who wants this, or it may be the adoptive parents or the birth parents, but there is a reopening of an open adoption, which is really not a reopening because the first meeting was in a crisis. So I think there's a lot that goes on, and I do think that the search and reunion is the way to an open adoption for adults or for younger people. But I think the continuity of what happens along the way, it's important to pay attention to, because what we're seeking is openness. And I think what we need, not only, as Kara said, we need openness in terms of access to birth certificates, original birth certificates, but we also need openness in terms of facts, information, and the ability to make choices about meeting each other. So I'd love to have Kara respond, and then Patricia.
Sure. I mean, I think in my case, it's been mostly wonderful, but it's also very challenging. I think because time that my birth and adoption took place, everyone in my family, some of them weren't born yet, like my sister. Others were in a very different chapter of their lives. So even the relationships between those people at that time compared to the relationships between them now are very different. The way they all experienced my adoption is all very different. And so I've learned a lot about certainly my birth mother's perspective, but also like all of my aunt's perspectives, my cousins' perspectives, et cetera. And so I think what you say about seeking openness really is, for me, that was something that I really was looking for. I wanted to be connected. And for the most part, people have also wanted to be connected with me. There certainly are some members of my family where it's too difficult for them. And I think, I do have a background in social work, so a little bit of analysis on my part leads me to believe that I may represent something extremely painful for them. It's not me as a person, Kara, it's more like the representation. And so I understand that, and that's, albeit painful for me, I do understand that, like any relationship, it takes two people to consent to that relationship. What I would say is that the other piece in listening to to you, Joyce, talking about openness and connection and the different dynamics between relationships. What's very interesting in my experience is I've had a lot of challenges with relationships moving at different paces and sort of comparisons between relationships. So for example, my sister and I became very close very quickly. She was engaged when I met her, and she invited me to be in her wedding, which was like incredible, you know, alongside some of her closest friends she'd been friends with for years and years. And so like in my case, for my birth mother, it was wonderful for her to see us connecting, but also extremely challenging for her to see us bond so quickly, where my bond with her struggled and still to some degree does. And I think that going back to what Patricia had said about re-experiencing, or I think you used the term flashbacks. I think that being confronted with all of the decisions from the time of my adoption and the many, many years in between when I was adopted and when I reunified is very challenging still, not only for my birth family, but also for me. So situations where you go to a family party and there are family pictures and, you know, I'm included in the most recent, which is very sweet and kind, but you see all these pictures from years past that you weren't there, that you missed out on. So it is a very challenging. Openness as an adult is very challenging, just like openness for children can be challenging too.
Right. I have one more question for Patricia, but I want to answer a question that popped up below. Someone asked, how do you search for foster parents? And my quick answer, and we can have a longer one later, is that it's much easier to search for foster parents because those records are not sealed. You can find, it's a little bit of detective work certainly, but those are not sealed records in the way that adoption is. So that's just my tiny comment about that. And Patricia, my last question to you before we open up for more questions from everyone else is you and I have worked on many cases because of my deficit in Spanish and your ability to speak fluently. And so we've worked on cases with birth parents from other countries and with other languages. And certainly we've worked, I know that I have with Russia and with Korea and with, you know, many people who come from a very different culture, language, and, you know, it makes it more difficult. And the person who is translating is very important because it's not just translating language, it's translating feelings. And I just wanted you to say one thing about that before we jump to the questions, Patricia.
Well, it's one of the things that I have discovered is that there are a lot of assumptions made about other cultures and their management of adoption issues. And what I've discovered is that if you're reaching out to birth parents in other cultures and other countries, that birth parents are birth parents. The saying is birth parents care forever is true, whether they participate or don't. The anguish is the same. The desire to know that their children are well is the same. The respect of boundaries towards adoptive parents is very high. And so, yes, I think that being able to communicate clearly in the language of those people and with the heart, this is heart work as well as hard work. And having people that really get it about what the issues are and how to convey them is really critical. So much of the work that I do has been to honor the expressed needs of the people that come to me. There's often fear on the part of the external parties about the risks that people may face as they step into these journeys. And it's important for us to recognize that we as humans have all kinds of expressed needs and that we try to meet those needs to the best of our ability. So we as professionals are able to offer the support the preparation, the guidance that these people are able to benefit from in order to seek out the needs and to meet the needs that they have. And in the world of adoption, these needs are very profound. And for me, the lessons came very early in my life. The agency that we worked with tried to educate us, and did in the early days of understanding. But it was after reading books by Betty Jean Lifton and reading her story that I was determined that my children would not live that blockage and that lack of knowledge and that profound need to know that was an obstruction by the societal practices. So my advocacy has always been for change and to meet the needs for truth and for allowing the people the courage to risk.
Wonderful,
Joyce.
wonderful, wonderful. So Selena, are you gonna send us some questions, or I'm a little unsure how the next portion goes, but I want to make sure that the audience has a chance to send us some concerns they have.
Sure. So I can post some of the questions that's been that our participants have submitted. So one question is, how has the internet and Ancestry.com changed search and reunions?
I'll do a quick answer, but then, you know, each other person can say something. I think what it should have done, and we still don't see this, is there should be no need for closed records. There should be no need for not having access to your original birth certificate, because there is no more secrecy. There, you can find anyone on this earth, and you can find your family very easily. So what I would like to see is an acknowledgement of that and an awareness about it in terms of legislation. It certainly has been both a blessing and a curse. I've worked with many people who learned that their father was not their father. They had a donor, and that they were one of 37 siblings. So there are amazing things that are exciting, and there are frightening things that people are trying to grapple with and make sense of. Patricia and Kara?
I have found that to be the case. In doing searching, I certainly have used social media and the internet very extensively. And of course, my first step when I talk with people who were seeking my services for searching was to ask them if they had done DNA. So for years now, that has been my guidance, because again, I feel so strongly about the right to self-determination that the more people were able to do their own quest, the better. And so it has been immensely helpful. And that certainly is an angle that we put out there in our efforts to change state law. Happening here in Texas, where we've had blockage after blockage, but the fact is that DNA penetrates all secrets. And that's the way it is, Joyce.
Right, right. Kara, do you have any comment?
I do. Yeah, so even though in my case, social media didn't support my search on the back end, it certainly supported me in sort of getting an idea of who was out there in terms of my birth family after I made that initial connection. What I would like to say is that states have come a long way. Each state, there was a question posed to the panel earlier about if there's like one central place you can go to access an original birth certificate, or if it's a state by state issue. And it is a state by state issue. So like how Patricia mentioned, in Texas, there have been some obstacles moving legislation forward. Here in Rhode Island, as I mentioned earlier, we had passed legislation to allow adult adoptees age 25 and older to be able to access their original birth certificate. There are two bills before the legislature this session, Senate Bill 250 and House Bill 6189, I believe. And they're companion bills, so they essentially say the same thing. It's the same adjustment to current statute, and the main purpose of them would be to decrease the age of access for adult adoptees from 25 to 18. During the period of advocacy prior to the passage in 2011, advocates really wanted what's called a clean bill, meaning we wanted the age of majority to be the age at which adult adoptees in Rhode Island would be able to access their original birth certificates. And, there were some challenges to that. And so the age was compromised on at 25. And so now advocates are back now, almost exactly 10 years to the day virtually, when the original bill passed, to revisit it and decrease the age further. I've had personal experience where, because of my involvement with that advocacy years ago, a lot of different people have reached out to me, whether they're adoptees themselves or clinicians or just colleagues of mine who know I was involved in that, asking about how to access original birth certificates. And so in Rhode Island, you can access through the Vital Records Office. There's a link on the Department of Health's website where you can go to fill out an application. And again, for other states, it depends on what your state law indicates and how much access you do or don't have, what the age restrictions may be. But it really is, it's an opportunity for states to sort of meet up with where best practice is in terms of openness. And I think states really have an opportunity to bring a level of equity to adult adoptee rights, similar to the rights of non-adopted folks with access.
Great. Selena, do you have some other questions?
I do. So this combines some questions that were sent in ahead of time and one of the questions in the chat. So it's a few questions that are all connected. So mostly from the perspective of the adoptive parents. So how do you slowly open the door, ensure children will be safe? What age would you recommend children engage in the search and reunion activities? And what's a helpful response for adoptive parents to take when their adopted kids want to learn about their biological parents?
I'll take a stab at that, and we'll send it around.
Yeah.
And it's a complicated question, and I wouldn't be surprised if we each had a slightly different answer. I really believe that when parents finally realize, and they do realize that this is going to be an important thing for their child, it is, it's really okay for them to take on that search. If you're entrusted with the child, you should be entrusted with their story and with their reality. So I encourage parents to do the search for their younger children and to feel more comfortable and less anxious themselves before involving the child and informing. And this can happen at 4, 6. I mean, what would you say to this, Patricia?
I agree completely. It really is important for adoptive parents to be at peace with their role and to know that the truth of their family is that there are birth parents that are out there who are real flesh and blood important people. And whether their children talk about adoption or not, that the thinking about birth parents is a very constant feature. So communication in the family is really important to let the children know that parents are happy to proceed with these efforts. And I have worked with people whose children are infants and are beginning the quest to seek out birth family, which is wonderful because it allows the grown-ups to build relationships. I always encourage people to tell the truth about who the birth parents are. There was a time when they would call that person an aunt or an uncle. We don't do that. We need to tell the truth about who they are so that we can grow these relationships over time. When we are dealing with minor children, the relationships are guided by the adults, not by the children. And so we have to offer a lot of preparation, a lot of guidance, and walk along with all these families in order for them to manage these evolving relationships. But what a rich experience for everyone involved when they have a rightful place in what I call blended families that are very poorly understood in our society, but we are an expression of a blended family. I just want to mention the book that I wrote, How to Open an Adoption, is a guide for adoptive and birth parents to do their own thing if they wish to. It offers a lot of guidance so that when people want to do the self-determination thing, they have some tools to do it. But it does involve a huge consciousness of the issues for all involved and the evolving issues for the children as they walk along. Among them are things like titles. What do we call each other? And we have to have the comfort to know that our children very naturally will use mom and dad kind of words with both set of parents. And I'll give a very quick anecdote. Many years ago, I was visiting my younger daughter's birth mother in New York, and she called on the house phone. And when the birth mom answered the phone, she said, "Hi, Mom, can I speak with my mom?" This is the kind of thing that normalizes the truth that our children live with. They know they have two moms and two dads, and they have to navigate that with our support, whether we're part of the adoptive family or the birth family. Joyce.
Great. Kara, did you have something to say about this?
I do. So, so I think what's important for me to express to people is openness, from my view, is always the best option. So in situations where an open adoption agreement may not be as open as any party would like it to be, just having conversation really is the starting point for that. And I think there's certainly an age appropriate way to do that with children of all ages and well on into adulthood. In my personal experience, my adoptive parents were very open with me. I had a lot of adoption related books that were kid friendly around my house. I was allowed to ask questions. I was encouraged to ask questions. And I think the most difficult part for my adoptive parents at that time was not having all the answers. In addition to that, the desire to meet my birth family was just as strong for my parents as it was for me in some ways. I very vividly remember my mom, the day she met my birth mother, saying that she, during holidays, birthdays, anything, any kind of like milestone events, that she would often have a little bit of a hard time because she would be thinking, oh, there's someone else out there that doesn't know, what's going on with Kara, or isn't able to experience this holiday with her or this birthday with her. And so I think that there was a certain level of respect already sort of embedded on my parents' side when they met my birth mother. The other thing I would say is that titles are a very challenging thing. So for me, I have a very difficult time calling my birth mother mom. And I've been trying for 10 years now to find a title that sort of fits with her. And it's challenging too when you're introduced to other family members as auntie whoever, or Pa, for example, and not even necessarily by their real true name. So it is a very challenging thing, and vice versa as well. So like, for example, my nephew, he calls my parents Linda and Tom. So they don't have a title, but they're sort of grandparents. So it's a very challenging thing to navigate. And I think openness, talking about it, really is just the best way to trudge through it.
I always used to give a lecture when I had new interns and new staff. And and a lot of people were connected to adoption, is why they ended up in my clinic working there. And one of the things that I would say is your story is a case study of one. And, you can extrapolate a little bit and know something about the feelings people are having about things, but every single story is entirely different. Everyone's experience is different. Every adoption, your birth mother and your birth father's family may be entirely different. And I want to say one thing about language. These days, many of the birth parents, which is what we called them years ago, like to be called first parents or just parents. So it's really important to understand in the case study of one what someone wants to be referred to as and how to think about that. And my last comment is I popped into my mind. I have an 11-year-old client who I inherited because his anxiety was through the roof and he was very, very upset and no one knew why. And he very soon after starting to see me told me that he had located his brother in Colombia. And 11, this boy's 11. And he had located him on Facebook, and he had Facebook Translator because he didn't speak Spanish, and he was learning all kinds of very difficult things about his birth family with no adult guidance. So I think Patricia mentioned this, and I just wanted to emphasize that it's extremely important with kids that they have someone who can help navigate with them so that they're not left on their own, making sense of things in ways that don't make sense.
Mhm.
Selena, anything else? How are we doing?
Yeah, we're great on time. Just one more quick question connected to that. So how would you advise a child to bring up to their adoptive parents that they're interested in searching for their birth parents without worrying about hurting their feelings or offending them?
Well, I'm sure we each have an answer to that. I would say that, of course, people are going to have a reaction. And, some adoptive parents might get very hurt. And some might not, but might appear to be because they're concerned about how to respond. I think that it's very important for children to have answers to any of their questions. And they should be able to ask their parents anything. The problem is if they get this feeling that it's not the right thing to do, they may back off and never. That may have been what happened to the 11-year-old. He might have asked his parents, and when they acted like this was scary, he just went and did it himself. So I think we have to find a way to open communication, and parents need help. They need to get what they need to feel less anxious dealing with the reality that their child has another family. Patricia.
I agree completely. And really, I believe it starts with the preparation of prospective adoptive parents to be taught or to learn that communication in the family about adoption, as complex as sex education, if you will, needs to start from very early age to give children permission to talk about and ask about adoption. In the absence of that, if we have access to those children who are having these needs, then we help them sometimes by sitting with them as they share their needs to their parents. So much of what I frame for adoptive parents is that we as parents, whatever sort of parents we are, attempt to meet the needs of our children, our anticipated needs of our children, as well as the expressed needs of our children, and then assess how to best deal with those. So sometimes they need guidance from learning resources or coming to people like we are, but also that communication in the family is really key, because when these topics are not addressed, it really does create barriers within the relationship with adoptive parents. One of the things that I try to teach adoptive parents is that when people who are adopted have answers and access to their truth, that in fact their relationships with their adoptive parents get redefined and strengthened. And so rather than fearing the outcomes of knowledge and contact, that they should be welcoming of it, because it strengthens the bonds that are there or could be there within the family. It's really critical to know that so many adopted people have a barrier in their emotional beings from true connection and deep connection, attachment to their adoptive parents, that is guided by their needs for about the missing birth parents, your missing birth family. So these are huge issues that require education early on with prospective and actual adoptive parents.
I'm torn, Selena, because I want to make sure that Kara gets some time, but I'm looking at my clock and I know you were running a tight ship.
No,
So-
it's fine. Let's take a,
I can be,
I want to hear a quick answer from Kara.
I can be very brief. So what I would say is I too have spoken with prospective adoptive parents and foster parents. And what I would say is in a culture now where openness is best, both in terms of best practice standards, as well as research indicates that's what's best for everyone involved. I would just say to adoptive parents that knowing where they come from and who they look like is part of their identity formation. And so it's very important to support your child through that. so that they can truly have a whole picture of who they are.
Great, great. So Selena, should I hand it over to you?
Yes. Thank you all so much. Joyce, Kara, Patricia, thank you all so much for sharing your personal experiences and your insights and everything you've learned and experienced. I know everyone can really benefit from it so much. So we really, really appreciate you being so vulnerable and sharing to help so many other people. And thank you to all of our participants from all over the country for also taking the time to join us today. If you want to follow along on social media, you can keep up with additional events that are coming up. I also, if you are looking for more resources, you can check out Joy's website and her book. And there's a number of books here from Patricia as well, and including this one, which is a Spanish translation, and you can email her here. If you're, you can take a picture of the slide if you need to remember, or Patricia or Joyce, you can go ahead and feel free to put anything into the chat, Kara, as well, if you want to share with the participants. But these are great resources that'll provide additional information to you all from our experts here today. And today was our first of our 3-part spring discussion series. We have 2 more coming up, one next week on youth permanency, and then in a couple weeks on creating a racially and culturally just system for children. You can scan the QR code that's in here in the on the screen, and then I'll also make sure you all get a follow-up email with the information. And our chat next week is with these 4 amazing people. Gary, Bob, Sixto, and Nicole have a variety of experiences that they can share with you all to learn more about the concept of youth permanency. And I just put the link in the chat so you all can register there if you haven't already. And then one last thing is that every summer, Adoption Rhode Island has a big benefit, fun summer event, knowing of circumstances that we're in right now. It's not going to be a huge event in person, but there's going to be a variety of ways to stay involved and have small in-person or virtual events. So we're also looking for people to host and donate and share for that. And that link is also, you can register for that in the link I put in the chat as well. And I just want to thank you all again so much for taking the time to join us today. Joyce had to jump off for another call, but thank you so much to our participants for joining and listening today. And then to our panelists, Kara and Patricia. Thank you all so much.
Thank you
You're
so much.
welcome.
Take care, everyone.
Bye, everybody.